So like as Ruben mentioned before, we're going to start off the show with kind of like a more high-level overview, look at a lot of the skills and traits, but not ramble on too much. We'll spare most of the chat from my excessive rambling, and we'll come back to that later in the show. So Specter, we have Support Thief, Scepter, Wells, Shadow Shroud. That's it. There we go. Let's move on to the...
All right. No, that's not nice.
Okay.
Give us more.
We want a little bit more detail. That's fair. Yeah, so Support Thief. It's kind of our first foray into how does a thief do support skills. And so one of the places where it started is with ally targeting, because we have obviously Thief is much more of this kind of assassin-y, bursty, roamer type character where you're very focused on kind of eliminating a single target. So with Specter, it became more of, well, what if we focus on supporting a single target and really kind of creating this more of like, kind of like protect the king. It's going to be great for like World v. World, protect the commander, have a bunch of Specters all buffing up the commander, giving him barrier and giving him healing and all that stuff. And so obviously we have Shadow Shroud, which we'll talk about real quick. First things first, initiative pool reduction down to 9 baseline. A lot of people speculated with that based off the UI changes that came in last patch or the patch before that. I don't remember anymore. But yeah, reduced initiative pool because we are giving access to Shadow Shroud, 5 extra skills, a lot of powerful skills there. So a little bit of a trade-off there. And so we also replacing Steel with Siphon. And so instead of having that mobility aspect, we're going to have just a kind of a ranged ability. And this is our first look at ally targeting. So you can see here on the skill fact, different effect if I am attacking an enemy or targeting an ally. And we're going to see more of this on the Scepter as well. This is going to create kind of these modal skills that enable the Specter to either go and create this support character, or you can just be more of this aggressor, and we're going to see a lot of Condi damage coming out from both the Scepter and the Shadow Shroud kit. So Siphon, use it on an enemy, apply some boons. We have some steel traits equipped as well, so it obviously inherits all the steel traits. Gives me some Shadow Force back, and that's what happens when you target an enemy. Targeting an ally, this is just going to give some barrier. This also applies Rotwell of Venom. We'll talk about that a little bit more once we get into the traits. So to build up Shadow Force, you can either use it, obviously Siphon on an enemy. Every time you spend initiative, that's going to give you some amount of Shadow Force as well. Obviously I'm a cheater, I just have infinite amounts. Most players aren't going to be able to do that. Hopefully no players will be able to do that. But
yeah, it was like most?
Yeah, hopefully none. I thought about it a little bit more. Yeah, so anyway, so when I Siphon on an ally, this is also going to be kind of like a marking mechanism where I've now marked this golem as my kind of priority target. My priority support target. So when I enter Shadow Shroud, we're going to see that this tether gets created. Now I am tethered to this golem, I'm tethered to my ally, and every time, all of the way that all these skills are going to work is that as I'm hitting enemies, we'll come back to these skill effects real quick as well. But as I'm hitting these enemies, doing some stuff, hitting some enemies, we're going to see we're getting some barrier in there, we're getting some healing, getting some might applications. Basically, as I, the Thief, go aggressive in Shadow Shroud, I am also supporting my allies. So that's kind of the way that Thief is the support character. We still want to keep it as this very aggressive play style, but as you damage enemies, as you attack enemies, you're going to be empowering your tethered ally. If you want to, you can also switch the tethered target while you're in Shroud, as long as Siphon is on cooldown, or yeah, as long as Siphon is available. So we're just going to pop out and pop back in real quick, give myself some more Shadow Force, and then we can go over the skills. So first up, we have the auto attack, Hunt Shot. This is just going to be damage and torment. This is giving my tethered target might, and also healing them, you can see, per target struck. So pretty significant healing if I'm hitting multiple targets with this. Moving into Grasping Shadows, this is another, primarily ranged attack, damage, torment, cripple. It's going to do Condi Cleanse for my tethered target and also heal as well. So again, attacking enemies while I support my allies. Moving into Dawn's Repose. This is going to be a little bit of mobility back. We lost access to steel, but now we have a nice little dash here. This also gives you barrier per target struck, and also gives your tethered target barrier per enemy struck. And it also fears enemies, so pretty powerful skill. Dash in, get the fear off, get some healing to your ally, and that's going to set up Eternal Night, as here's kind of the big damage payoff of the Shroud kit. This is a more powerful damaging ability. You see chill, weakness, poison in there as well. It's also going to heal you and your tethered target per enemy struck again. Finally, we have Mind Shock. This is going to be a delayed trigger. Pretty long kind of setup into a nice little stun there, and that is going to give you stability. It's going to give your tethered ally additional healing. So a lot of AoE here, a little bit of mobility, some good crowd control, and a lot of, again, single target allied support. Moving into the Scepter, we're going to see, again, these kind of modal skills. So as I target my enemy, or I target my ally, I'm so used to golems being enemies, you know, they're just it's very confusing, but not really that confusing. Just not important. So you can see auto attack is barrier. Or if I hit an enemy, auto attack does torment. Pretty straightforward. Next up we have Shadow Saps. This is going to give myself might when I'm hitting enemies, so a little bit of a self buff while also weakening and dealing some damage. Or I can give my ally might and also give them, you know, a bit more barrier. So we have a lot of potential to just kind of use auto attack, use skill 2, and we'll see as we get into skill 3s, more of this single target. This is going to be obviously spending a lot of initiative to keep this up, to kind of support that priority target. Moving into the dual skills, so we have 2. We have pistol offhand and we have dagger offhand. We'll start with dagger offhand. Twilight combo, again, targeting an enemy. This is going to be a kind of pretty straightforward damaging ability. A lot of conditions in there. Kind of a cool effect where you throw a projectile, you throw another projectile, and they kind of combine into a singular projectile and hit the enemy. Or, again, hitting the ally is going to do some barrier, going to do some healing and swiftness in there as well. Over on the pistol side, we're going to have a combo skill here. Starting off with measured shot, this is either going to blink away from your target or toward your target, depending on, so I blink away from enemies, blink toward allies. That's going to flip over into Endless Night. So it starts off with a little immob, and that's going to combo into like this nice slow and torment damaging beam attack. Alternatively, using on your ally, you can blink toward them and then get the beam, which does a nice amount of, very large amount of quickness in addition to barrier and regen. So really powerful dual skill. This is a pretty big investment, 6 initiative overall with the baseline 9 pool. Most people are probably going to take Trickery Trait Line to get a little bit more endurance there, or a little bit more initiative there, apologies. And then we also have a stealth attack because we're a thief. So if you stealth up, you're going to get access to Shadow Squall. It's going to be kind of this rapid fire flurry attack. So we see some poison in there, targeting an enemy. And again, targeting an ally, we're going to get a nice amount of healing. Notably that when you use a stealth attack on an ally, you're going to get revealed. This is kind of an important note to make sure that you couldn't just infinitely use this. It's kind of the same mechanic. Hitting an enemy will reveal you, hitting an ally will also reveal you. And finally we have the wells. So the wells give a little bit more access to AoE. The cool thing about the thief wells is that they're all shadow steps. So you'll teleport to a location and then drop the well effect at that location. You know, we gave a lot of mobility to a lot of classes for this expansion. We saw Willbender get a lot of mobility, a lot of dashes. Bladesworn got a blink. Spoilers, both Untamed and Mechanist also now have shadow steps. Just framing some context here. So, you know, Thief felt really bad. Everyone else getting mobility. So we just gave all the mobility. All of these wells are now teleports. So the actual well effects, nothing too crazy, honestly. Well of Gloom, obviously, you know, it's going to be a heal. It's also going to cripple enemies. Well of Bounty, you see a lot of boons on this skill effect. It is 1 per pulse. It is just going to prioritize giving you boons that you don't already have. And if you do already have every boon on you, it's going to give you might. Well of Tears, nothing too crazy. It's going to be poured in, get a nice AoE damage. Well of Silence, we have a little bit of a daze here. Got some daze on that daze pulse. Also, this is going to, anytime it interrupts an enemy, it is going to apply a condition. And finally, we're going to have kind of the condition half of the damage well. We have a well that gives you unique conditions that you don't already have. And if you already have every condition, it'll just give you torment. Finally, we have the elite skill, Shadowfall. This is going to be a teleport in, and then it's going to create this kind of AoE pull. It's kind of similar to Gravity Well, but it's going to be like more of just a pull. So a really big kind of playmaking opportunity to really engage, get that big CC, AoE CC, set yourself up, set up your allies. Do a quick run through for the traits. Starting off, people reminded me that we should probably hover the minor trait because it does have useful text, even if it doesn't actually really do anything. So there it is. There's your tooltip. Moving into Dark Sentry. This is the Rotwallow Venom that we saw throughout the barrier applications. Anytime you give an ally barrier, you're going to give them Rotwallow Venom, which is Torment on hit. And it's also going to be kind of, here's the healing bonus, really identifies this as a support character, increase your healing. Next up we have Panaku's Ambition. which is going to be a little bit more barrier, plays well with Wall of Venom, and also just barrier is a good support thing to have. So whenever you use a stealth attack, or you hit an enemy with a stealth attack, you will get barrier for yourself. Anytime you stealth yourself or an ally, you will then give them barrier. Then we'll just kind of speed run through these since we'll come back and talk about them a little bit later in the show. Second Opinion, here's some healing power, bonus healing power for Scepter, and a little bit more for condition damage per condition damage stats. So Plague Doctor, potentially a really good stat combination here. Next up we have Shallow Grave. This is kind of the escape death mechanic that we've seen on a few traits in the past, where this is going to be for your tethered ally. If you are in Shadow Shroud and your ally would die, instead you will consume all your Shadow Force and heal them instead. This will also kind of have that Unholy Sanctuary mechanic where if you would die with enough Shadow Force, it will enter Shroud instead. And finally we have Consume Shadows, which is just going to be when you leave Shroud, consume the rest of your Shadow Force and AoE heal. And we'll show off the kind of highest potential of this trait a little bit later in the show, because it's potentially a very large heal. In the Master Tier slot, we're going to see a lot of ways to get Shadow Force. So Larcenous Torment, here's your aggro trait, Torment damage and Shroud gain whenever you apply Torment. Amplified Siphoning here in the center is going to improve Siphon, so either more Shadow Force when hitting an enemy or increased barrier when supporting an ally. And finally we're going to have Traversing Dusk. Here's the Well trait. It's also just going to be heal on Shadow Step, gain some Shadow Force on Shadow Step, and also Wells now give Alacrity on the initial pulse. So a little bit of AoE Alacrity in there for this specialization. Finally, the Grandmaster slot, starting with Strengths of Shadows. This is again going to be kind of the more aggressive option, a little bit of damage reduction in there as well, but here's some expertise. Here's some Rot Wall of Venom bonuses, so a little bit more damage potential there. Next up we have Hungering Darkness. This is going to be more of a single target supporty thing, where you're going to pull conditions from your tethered target and also cleanse conditions from yourself. So a pretty powerful effect there. It's also going to heal your ally per condition cleansed. And finally we have access to Shade Step. This one's going to be kind of a mix. It's going to give you a little bit more personal barrier when you siphon an enemy, and also it's going to allow you to revive enemies with Siphon instead of just applying barrier and healing. And the final note here is that if you Shadow Step while you have barrier, it will consume your barrier and give that an AoE radius to allies. So kind of that AoE support again. Kind of across the bottom we see a lot of AoE support. It's just coming back to the Specter. I mean, we kind of super high level described everything where it's like, okay, it's Support Thief. What does that even mean? It's kind of like an interesting design problem. As it's like, okay, we want to do Specter. We have the idea, Specter, Support Thief. What does that actually look like? So we talked about, single target is kind of what Thief does already. So leaning into that single target for some of these Thief skills is kind of the cool idea. We still want to keep the aggressive options, but then having this kind of these modal skills on Scepter is really cool because you can kind of bounce between the two. You could throw some projectiles here, and then once you get into like the triple chop portion of this, you can switch over here and throw. I mean, that's not too exciting, but there's just it's really interesting to see like how players are going to take advantage of ally targeting because this is a brand new mechanic. And so it was kind of an interesting balance point when we're looking at the Specter of, well, how do we balance single target support against kind of all the AoE supports? You look at something like Tempest, you look at things like Druid, where you have much more AoE potential for these heals and like the buffs that are applied. Whereas Specter, we're focusing on a single target. We really want to try to, and I don't know if we quite got there for the betas, but really push the limit of, okay, if we're only supporting one target instead of 5, we can really go crazy with some of these numbers. And I mean, you see Endless Night here. This is, what, 14 seconds of quickness with no boon duration? And this is actually secretly an AoE skill because it's a beam. So if you line it up well, let's come over here. You can hit multiple targets with this, give a bunch of barrier, give a bunch of quickness. Very powerful skill, a lot of Rot Wall of Venom. So, I mean, we definitely see Endless Night as one of the strongest skills on the kit, and again, really pushing that single target with a little bit of that beam AoE as well. But the rest of the kit, it's like, okay, look at Shadow Sap. This is a single target, it's going to give 5 might, 3 initiative cost. So pretty low initiative cost, decent amount of damage, decent amount of barrier. Looks like the skill fact's actually wrong here, Carl. 539 barrier is not 1014.98 barrier. So
Did you just blame Carl?
Yeah, it's Carl's fault,
Every
as
show.
always.
Carl's just sitting at home like, what did
we
I
like
do,
we like
man?
to play around when.
We love Carl.
Yeah. I mean, obviously Carl's super cool. Specter is awesome. So whenever we have an opportunity to call out something super small, like the skill fact is wrong, or the minor trait is named Specter, which probably isn't correct. You know, it's always fun to have a little fun call out there. But like I said, getting back to this is about like 1500 barrier, 5 might. That's a pretty strong skill, but it is again single target. And this is building up stacks of Wall of Venom. Potentially, you see a lot of Wall of Venom from this character, like the auto attack can build up a lot. 13, 14 stacks. I mean, this is just singular torment again, but still pretty powerful, kind of again, supporty style of gameplay. And we obviously have some AoE ways to grant barrier here as well with this kind of stealth. So we go Shadow Refuge, do some stealth here. This is only going to be, this trait specifically is an important call out. This is only when you apply stealth to an ally who is not already stealth. That's very important for Shadow Refuge, but also important for like blast finishing smoke fields, stuff like that, to make sure it doesn't blow out too hard. And then again, that sets up kind of the stealth attack. So the kind of interesting thing that we didn't talk about too much on the speedrun side of this is that the Specter is actually potentially also a very tanky thief character because you have a Shroud. This is mechanically similar to Necro Death Shroud, where this absorbs incoming damage. This golem is going to use rapid fire on me. I'm going to just, you know, take damage against my Shroud total instead of my health pool. So obviously the primary goal of this character is to be this kind of supporty barrier, still aggressive character, but you can also just build this like, hey, I'm actually going to be pretty selfish and focus on Shadow Force generation and then go into Shroud and be almost this bruiser thief. Maybe it's potentially play really well with like sword, or even just the more aggressive kits with like dagger pistol, and you just have significantly more health than thieves are used to having. Potentially some interesting builds that could come out of that. And I think like that's always one thing to me that stands out is like what makes an elite spec really awesome is like we kind of have a design goal coming in. With Spectre, it's support thief. Okay. And we really focus on, okay, support thief is support thief. But then also we see that there are tools that exist here to kind of create this other playstyle. The bruisery tanky thief is something that doesn't really exist. Like Daredevil has a lot of evades, a lot of mobility, evasion, that type of a little bruisery. Obviously, you tend to go more glass cannon on that type of thing, where this is just more of a ability to mitigate damage is another kind of unique thing that Thief has access to with this specialization. Let's see, what else? I got some notes written down so I don't go too off the rails and end up in the middle of nowhere. I wanted to definitely show off the healing potential of Consume Shadows. We really glazed over this. But the way that this skill works is that how we mentioned earlier, this trait rather, is that anytime you exit Shroud, it's actually going to eat all of your Shadow Force and instead do a heal in the radius around you. And so if I have maximum Shadow Force and I'm just going to double tap Shroud, we're going to see kind of the maximum potential of this skill or this trait. Very confusing. But we saw that was like a 27k heal. And this is going to give a little bit. These golems have a giant health pool, so they get entirely healing. But the way it works with players is that you're going to overcap if you full heal. It'll give them barrier instead. So obviously important note, this trait is unique per game mode. So you won't get the full 100% conversion from Shadow Force to healing. I think it's like 33%. Tried to be a little conservative with that to make sure it wasn't too crazy. You are investing a lot to get into that. Like if I do just double tap my Shroud, that's consuming all of my Shadow Force to just get, I mean, it's a giant heal, but it is removing the opportunity to go in and press those buttons and, you know, support my tethered ally. So really strong trait with a lot of just interesting decision points of when do you actually want to exit to get the heal payoff. Let's see, some other stuff we didn't really talk about is that Siphon is actually going to have a different cooldown depending on if you hit an enemy or versus an ally. So again, trying to push the more supporty route is when I Siphon an ally, also because it doesn't give any Shadow Force, it's going to have a much shorter cooldown as opposed to when I use Siphon on the enemy target. Which probably, I'd expect a lot of Siphon on enemy just because, you know, Shadow Shroud is so useful and so valuable to get access to these skills. You want to maximize your Shadow Force gain from Siphon as well as kind of the other sources. But you do have the opportunity to just kind of chain Siphon on nearby allies and get that much shorter cooldown. And so, I mean, what I talked about earlier, where this character was really trying to be a single target support, we were a little concerned about the value of that type of character in the game that is Guild Wars 2, because obviously, like, all the support classes in this game are largely AoE support classes, and even if we really push the value of some of these powerful single target abilities, it's still not going to be as relevant in in the modes where you care a lot about those kind of AoE group supports, looking at stuff like raids or World v World group support. I think in World v World there's some interesting gameplay where you just have an army of Specters all supporting the commander and really maximize the value of that single target. But we did add some of those AoE support tools, just, they're kind of snuck in here on the traits, a little bit on the wells, where you can still do these a little bit of AoE support, just because we need to keep the character viable for the game that exists. We can't just force the Specter into the game and say, hey, single target support, have fun, when that might not always be it might not be the thing that you need in the circumstances where you actually want a support character. So we see a lot of AoE support, obviously Consume Shadows, the Well trait. Shade Step is again more AoE barrier. So we do have the opportunity to kind of trait into those more AoE support options in addition to being the single target support character. Traversing Dusk is a really interesting one because it heals on Shadow Step. We also have a trait that does that up here in Shadow Arts. So you can potentially kind of go into this, you get to kind of double dip on your Shadow Steps, right? And there's kind of a really interesting idea here where I have no idea if this is actually a good idea. But obviously we have the really low cooldown or low initiative Shadow Step with Infiltrator Strike on Sword. And so if I have both of these Shadow Step heal traits, then I can do potentially a lot of healing, because you're gonna blink in, heal, 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 heal. I'm not even cheating recharge right now, and you can see pretty decent. Obviously, no one in the real world is just gonna spam blink in, blink out, blink in, blink out, blink out, blink out, because that's not super realistic. But it is kind of a line that exists with Sword, which is already one of these weapons that isn't super intuitive for this type of character to have. So that's potentially interesting. Obviously, all the wells are Shadow Steps, so you might just want to go into Shadow Savior anyway. Every time you blink, you're going to be getting kind of those double procs. Obviously, the Alacrity coming out as well. Potentially a lot of interesting AoE and just general support value there. Trickery. People are probably going to play Trickery because you want more initiative. That's kind of a thing that Thieves are already used to. Reduced initiative pool here with the Specter. It's going to be almost even more important. It's also going to kind of maybe influence some of your utility choices. Maybe you think more about roll for initiative. Maybe you think more about, going into Shadow Arts, getting Shadow's Rejuvenation to get those initiative gains. Maybe you go into Acro, get some more initiative back. Because, again, initiative is going to be funding your Shadow Force, which is going to be funding your Shadow Shroud, which is going to be funding or enabling a lot of your most powerful abilities. So some interesting build considerations for this character. Probably not going to go 5 wells, although you can, and you can just kind of fly across the map. Blink, 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 and so on. A lot of these wells are still pretty good skills. The heal, obviously pretty solid. The boons, this one's kind of interesting because you need to kind of figure out, or the more of the powerful boons are on the back half of the skill. Quickness is kind of in the middle, Alacrity kind of in the middle. But you want to kind of already have the first boons on this list, so that doesn't give you those boons. You don't want to get regen from this, you want to get quickness. So some interesting considerations in how you sequence abilities. So honestly, I'm pretty excited for this character to see how it plays, because already it's doing a lot of unique stuff. Shroud Thief, Support Thief, Single Target, Ally Targeted. There's just a lot of things that we haven't seen in the game yet. And so there's a lot of opportunity for cool stuff to happen as you guys in chat get your hands on it, play it, figure out what kind of compositions you want to build around it, what roles you want to play with this character, and really figure out kind of the optimal builds and strategies that you're going to be implementing. So pretty excited for this. I think, it's definitely going to be awesome. and it'll be exciting to watch all of that. I'm just trying to cleanly wrap up and then fumbling through it, because that's kind of the, we talked a little bit about more stuff on this character. There's an infinite amount that we could ever talk about, but there's a beta next week. You guys probably just want to play it and stop listening to me. But more realistically, we still have some other stuff to talk about. So we'll probably wrap it up for the Specter here, move on to Untamed, then we'll do Mechanist, and then we'll kind of wrap up. And we can always talk about this more and more in the future as well.